for their contributions to date.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr Speaker, in early 2009 I attended the ministerial meeting on the drivers of crime, and I was so impressed with the quality of the discussion that occurred there that I went back to the Labour caucus and asked if we could offer to work collaboratively with the government on these issues that were the drivers of crime. Obviously, there are distinct differences across the House in terms of how we might address crime, but the drivers of crime, they were just so blindingly obvious, as one of the National Party ministers is wont to say. We said that the area that needed commitment from governments of all colours across electoral cycles was the question of agreed policies around 0 to 12-year-olds. We stopped it at 12 because we felt that with some of the policies that National were bringing forward, like the boot camps, things like that, that weren't evidence-based, at least on the 0 to 12 we could get agreement. National wasn't prepared to go down that path, but what they did agree to do was to undertake some, and I quote, initial cooperation on the alcohol issue. Unfortunately, if what has occurred is cooperation, then I would really hate to see what the alternative was. As the former minister who introduced an alcohol reform bill before the 2008 general election and announced the Law Commission review, I have been hugely disappointed in the lack of progress from this government. I've been even more disappointed in the misrepresentation of the current debate around the alcohol reform bill. And the first thing that I just want to address is the conscience vote. Parliament had a conscience vote dating back to the days when we had a triennial referendum on prohibition, continuance or state purchase and control. And yes, Mr Speaker, even I'm old enough to recall voting in one of those. But when the referendum ended, so should have the conscience vote. It was at that point that we should have realised that it was no longer going to be a justice issue, but really ought to have been a health issue in terms of regulating the sale and purchase of what is a drug, as we do with the pharmaceuticals legislation, as we do with the Misuse of Drugs Act. So, Mr Speaker, we actually could have had that chance then, but we didn't. The Law Commission said that the conscience vote can, and again I quote, reduce the quality and effectiveness of the alcohol law that Parliament enacts, and that the resulting statute can lack coherence and structured logic. What the Law Commission didn't anticipate when they wrote those words was that it could also lack teeth. It could also lack teeth. And the reason, when the Law Commission wrote its report on the conscience vote, it was absolutely crystal clear that it had the role of drafting the legislation that would come before this House. It was the National Government that took away their opportunity to actually draft the law, and so they didn't anticipate National preventing them from completing the task that they had been given. National, of course, gave up the conscience vote except for age, and I have to say that was a very clever move on their part, because all of the public focus then went on the remaining conscience vote, the age, and all of us got rung up by various parts of the media to ask us how we were voting on this one issue, and that was the tactic, that was the strategy. Have all the public attention on the age so we can't see what the real issues are, and that's how they got agreement. The rest of the bill did nothing controversial, and in fact delivered to many of those that were arguing for nothing controversial to come to the law, well, no substantial change to made. So this is National's bill. It is not a shadow of the Law Commission would have written, and that is why I've been saying throughout this debate that it is a travesty. The Law Commission spells out exactly what is required, and all of the people who stood up in this House and said they want evidence, go and read the Law Commission report. That is the evidence. It has all the evidence we need. And the evidence says increase the price of alcohol, increase the purchase age for alcohol, decrease accessibility, decrease marketing and advertising, increase drink driving measures, and then on top of that, increase treatment options for heavy drinkers. So who has dominated this debate out there in the public arena, and who has actually dominated the debate in this House? And I'd say that there are two interests. On one side there are the private interests, and on the other side there is the public good. And I just want to describe who's been mounting the argument for the private interest, because it isn't just the alcohol industry that we've heard about. It isn't just the breweries and the distilled spirits, and it isn't just the wine industry and the hospitality industry, although many of them have different views on different matters, because there isn't a level playing field out there in terms of who can do what. The real winners, the real private interests that have dominated this debate are the Food and Grocery Council, who have actually continued their ability to sell dirt cheap alcohol through our supermarkets, thereby driving down the cost of takeaway alcohol that is drunk away from supervised premises, where there is no host responsibility beyond the door. So as soon as somebody walks out the door with the bottle of whatever, the host responsibility goes out the door with them. Who are the other private interests that we have dominating this debate? The advertisers and the marketers. But most importantly, it is those who receive the advertising dollars, the media. I'm afraid they are the true influencers of public opinion, and they have sought to influence public opinion on advertising and marketing, pushing that private interest over the public good. And I'm going to come to the public good in a minute. When I introduced the original bill that National threw out, I remember that there was a headline in the Herald, and what it said was that I was putting a guy out of business who had run his dairy for 24 years, that my bill was going to put him out of business, and he'd been running this dairy for 24 years. But then read the story, because the headline tells the story, and not everyone reads the whole story. But when you read the story, he hasn't had a licence to sell alcohol for 24 years. He actually only had the licence to sell alcohol, beer and wine, for 3.5 years. And guess how much that alcohol made up of his turnover in that dairy? 30% of his turnover in 3.5 years was selling alcohol from a dairy masquerading as a grocery store. And that's the problem. We are not debating the real issues because we are not seeing the real issues actually being put in front of the public in terms of the public good. Who represents the public good? Who's been speaking on behalf of the public good? The police, the people who operate our courts, our hospitals, the emergency departments, ACC, health groups, NGOs and not-for-profits working on areas in terms of public health right the way through to domestic violence, communities struggling to deal with hard issues, finding alcohol promotion being really a major part of their concerns that they're having to confront as a community. But they are fearful of speaking out. And why are they fearful of speaking out? It's actually not because they want to be challenged on their views. It's because they are fearful they will lose their charitable status. They are fearful that they will lose government funding if they speak out against government policy. The truth is that the NGO sector, the not-for-profit sector, the health sector, our police, they are not participating in what's been described as political advocacy, Mr. Speaker. They are in fact representing the public good, and it is their interests that we have sought to prevail upon in this House. That is why we retained the conscience vote for this debate. We wanted to debate the real issues: restrictions on advertising, discounting and promoting of alcohol, restrictions on trading hours, minimum pricing, making local alcohol policies mandatory and strengthening the community's say, banning the sale of RTDs with more than 5% alcohol and more than 1.5 standard drinks, health risk warning labels and nutritional information panel requirements, heavy health levies and lower blood alcohol levies for drink driving. All all of which would contribute to saving lives. Mr Speaker, today the Alcohol Action New Zealand had put out a media release saying that National's alcohol reform bill has totally failed the public. The campaign for effective alcohol law reform will go on, it says. National has only delayed the inevitable. Just as happened with tobacco reform, parliamentary champions will emerge who are prepared to put the public first. Meanwhile, history will judge those MPs who willfully planned and led the wasted opportunity to do something to help hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders being harmed.
Tim McIndoe.
After I spoke on the committee debate last Thursday,